Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 43 of the Canberra Football Show, your NPL2 season review. We've got a very special guest on the show, the man that knows everything NPL2, Chris Webb. Chris, how's it going, mate?
Good. How you guys going?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. I mean, shame about the season, but we're happy to at least be back and chatting with everyone again. That is very good indeed. Michael, how's it going today?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Matt. I was just watching the Premier League last night, and I'm actually in the middle of watching the Juventus and Milan game, watching that back. So
thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still winless this season, Matty. What's going on?
Oh, we're absolutely a shambles, mate. We're in the relegation zone as we speak.
You bring back Pirlo, I say.
fellow, I'm sure fellow Juve fans don't agree with me, but I've been saying from the beginning, don't bring back Allegri. It's not going to end well. And I know it's only the start of the season. Obviously, we're not going to get relegated, but I still don't think we're going to make that top four. I could be wrong. Anyway, we'll on to less depressing news. Let's get on to the NPL2. Well, we're going to get into Chris's team of the season, but first, Chris, first time we've had you on since lockdown. What did you think about the decision to, obviously not particularly to end the season as it did because, everything was out of everyone's hands in that regard, but to considering 80% of the matches were played, they decided to allocate promotion and relegation and just hand out the league titles as they were. What did you think about
that? Look, so I'm not sure if you guys know, but I'm part of the Premier League Standing Advisory Committee. So essentially we played a small role in providing advice to the board about what we think should happen at the end of the season. Look, I've probably got a little bit of cognitive dissonance about this. I think that they did the right thing in not abandoning the season, but actually concluding it through whatever mechanisms were available. And in most cases, I think the outcome was rather fair and just. I know that there's precedence from Victoria and New South Wales that they did abandon the seasons, but they didn't get through as much of the season as we did. We got closer to that kind of end mark where I think the end picture was a little bit clearer and there were a few metrics that we kind of floated around, and no matter which metric you applied, you usually got the same outcome. Tuggeranong going down, for example, especially after what happened with the forfeit with Kuma, which is a completely different story, and how that kind of came about and whether that was the right situation or not. But with that result, they were virtually relegated already. It was about a less than 1% chance if you kind of worked it out that they were going to stay up before the games had played out. But the probably across the board through all the NPL youth, NPL women's, one of the closest was the NPL2 men's going up. Oh, yeah. And so close that it actually came down to round 16. Both teams were on the same points and a 2-goal difference in O'Connor's favour. And then the next week, ANU unfortunately played Queanbeyan in that last game, and we're actually winning 2-1 come the 90th minute, and then 7 minutes into extra time, Queanbeyan scored an equaliser. So if the referee had just called full time in the 94th minute, 95th minute, we would have had a situation where both teams were still tied on points. And if that was the case, it would be pretty interesting to know what Capital Football would have done, whether they would have, because essentially the metric that they used was points per game, it would have been the exact same outcome, and whether they would have gone to goal difference and a +2 goal difference. It would have ended up maybe +3 because 4 because they won 3-0. Whether that would have been enough, again, that's very, very close. And I guess the other thing is they only ended up playing each other once. ANU and O'Connor had their second round game rained out and they never got around to playing it. So again, if that game had been played and ANU had won that game, they would have been ahead. So it was just so close. But I think in the end, if you break it down, it was the fair decision that O'Connor, if somebody had to go up, that it was O'Connor, because the one game that they played, O'Connor won that game. So I think that in the end, that probably means the right outcome came about.
Yeah, and as we discussed in the previous couple episodes, you're not going to make everyone happy in that regard, but at least there was some sort of conclusion, because you've been involved in in Canberra football for a while, and especially around the Capital League, and you've realised, promotion's been promised for a while. So it's good to see that there was at least some sort of outcome. Of course, very tough for someone like an ANU, considering they were so close, but at least there was some sort of outcome in that regard. All right, before we get into the teams, before we get into going through all the clubs in the ladder, let's start with Chris Webb's NPL2 team of the season, shall we? Before we get into the teams that were voted for by the NPL1 and NPLW coaches in those respective leagues. Chris, take it away.
So look, let me premise this by only from listening to you guys and your last two podcasts that I thought, might be a good idea to do a team of the season. But look, unlike Russ's scientific method, I have zero scientific method. So I guess you could say that Russ's teams are kind of the vaccines, and mine is the anti-vaccine research that's gone into mine, because essentially just picked it off my own head, and with a very limited amount of games that I got to see teams play. Other than the one game that was telecast, and a few highlights that I've seen from some clubs posting games against other teams, it's really just the games where I got to watch. So pretty much, if a player had a good game against Weston, one of those two games, then they were likely to make it the team of the year, because I would have watched them have those good games. So look, goalkeeper for me, Jack Miller. You have to look at O'Connor's defensive record. I think, I don't have it in front of me, they conceded 8 goals, something around that mark, across 16, 17 matches. Unbelievable. And
it was 8 goals.
Jack had a massive part to play in that. Fantastic goalkeeper. And just nudging out Rory Larkin for me. Rory at Queanbeyan, he was fantastic. I think I said it in my pre-season write-up. Personally think Rory is the best goalkeeper in Canberra, and a massive pickup for a second division team to grab him. And he was fantastic again this year, and the games that I watched, he was fantastic, and even quite handy on the field in under 23s. He had a stint up front, and he's not too bad. Centre backs, Monty Grace from ANU, just a fantastic young centre back. A lot of pace, fantastic on the ball, very calm, just a really, really good quality footballer. And I think he's going to be essentially a big player. He's around in Canberra for quite some time. The other one, probably kind of stalwart of Canberra football. He's been around a long time and been part of ACT Rockets representative teams in the past, and that's Martin Zigmont, another one from O'Connor Knights, who had an exceptional year in the heart of defence. Fullbacks was a difficult one. I think I ended up going for a little bit of a license and picked Nick Hope from ANU at left back. Fantastic left-footed player. He's kind of that Mr. Fix-It. I know Adam Condipadero used him in a lot of positions. He's a really good central midfielder, really good centre back. But he played out wide on the left against Weston in one game, I remember, and he actually was a direct 2 fantastic assists for 2 Sam Carter's goals, and just had an amazing game. And he's just an extremely consistent player, and one of the ANU kind of old guard who's been there for a long time, and just a fantastic player there. The other one, was from Queanbeyan, their right back, Dylan Colbertado, who again was had a great year. He's a young player. I think he was the NPL 220s Young Player of the Year 2 years ago when we actually had a presentation night. That pre-COVID world that we can remember. And he's kind of just kept coming along leaps and bounds, and he's forced his way into the first team and a really stacked first team, but he's kind of made that spot his own. Probably on the bench, I had White Eagles left back Callum Rua. Again, a fantastic player, played at a high level, but NPL in Victoria, NPL 1 in Canberra. I think he was also part of the NPL 2 Team of the Year, official Team of the Year 2 years ago. So again, another quality player. In a centre midfield, I had in that 6 and 8 position, Sam Carter's clearly. I think I said this on the previous times on the pod. He's the best player in this league, in my opinion. And I think he showed it again this year. He's been away in Sydney and he just came back and just essentially picked up that spot of saying, I am the best player here. And the amount of goals he scored from not even a number 10 position, but a deep lying midfield position is just phenomenal. And partnering with him, I had Daniel Roberts, again, another O'Connor Knights player, again, former Tigers, Tuggeranong first grade player, and he was fantastic in the centre defence that he had with Liam Walsh. But I just had Daniel pipping that, and on the bench, Dayan Sandtrack, again, a stalwart there, but he had a fantastic season, I thought. In that 10 position, I think it was pretty clear he'd be my second runner-up for player of the season was Michael Adams from Queanbeyan. Just an absolute fantastic talent. And on the bench, I had a young Pat O'Rourke from O'Connor again. Diminutive player, but just fantastic. He's only young. He's come through that CUA program and just fantastically calm on the ball. Scored some headers. I don't know how he did that, but he scored quite a few goals again from that midfield and really added a lot of kind of extra dimension to O'Connor's game, I think. Up front was a tough one. Nico Kresic, kind of out in the wide position, was my first choice. And again, I think I'm harping back to the last time I was on, where I kind of said Nico and Michael Adams and Sam Carter's are my top 3 players. So he was instrumental in O'Connor getting promoted. Just a fantastic player who, if O'Connor can keep hold of him, he will be a special player in first grade next year. At the number 9 position, had Mark Shields. Again, another one of those older stalwarts, but he came in with a lot of expectations, even though, he's in his late 30s, and he was slow to start the season, and people kind of thought maybe those expectations were a little high, but once he got going, he really got going, and he scored a lot of goals, and I think he ended up second behind Sam Carter's in the end on the goal scoring tally. And my other wide player was Danny Roach from Yoogali. He probably didn't have the same standard of season as he did last year, but last year he was clearly the best player. Undoubtedly, I think if you asked anybody, as Yoogali kind of went through that season, only losing that one game in the regular season, he was just borderline unplayable. And while he might not have been quite up to that level, he wasn't far off it. And he was still a match winner for Yoogali when they needed him. And then on the bench, I had kind of 2 up front. Ed McCarthy from White Eagles was just a fantastic player and scored some outrageous goals this year. I know he scored a few crackers against Weston, but if you've seen it on social media, his goal against O'Connor Knights, which is the only game his winner. It was about the 91st minute. The only game O'Connor lost all season, and it was just a ridiculous strike. And then another of the old guard, Chase Deans, who had a fantastic year again. I think a lot of people thought Chase might be close to hanging up his boots, but again, he was instrumental to ANU's run and almost winning the league. So look, that's kind of my team there, and I had some honourable mentions from the three clubs who didn't get a representative in there. From Brindy, young Oliver Widdensons. He's a centre back. I imagine around 19, and he's played in this league for the last couple of years, and he's really come along leaps and bounds, and he showed kind of maturity in that centre back position way beyond his years. He's big, strong, very, very calm and good on the ball. And again, someone that I think Brindy should be desperate to try and hold on to. At Weston, Gus Record was fantastic in centre midfield, really their box-to-box engine, scored some outrageous goals. He scored, I think, 7 or 8 goals, and probably 6 of them were from 5-10 metres outside the box. Just, he doesn't like the simple goal. And for Wagga, Luke Stevens is a very special player. And you talk to a lot of the coaches in this division who ended up playing Wagga. They talk very, very highly of him. And he's someone who's actually moving to Canberra next year. So I'd really like to see him actually give NPL a run next year. I think there are a couple of clubs that he could actually get a bit of time for. So it would be great. He's a great young player. So yeah, look, that's my team. Again, as I said, not too much scientific method went into that, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. I know you guys kind of know a lot of these players, have seen a lot of these guys play.
Look, it was a pretty good team for me. I think the only person I would have put in there that you didn't have in the main starting 11 would have been Luke Stevens. That's the only one for me that I can think of at the top of my head that I would put in that team that you didn't put in there. But besides that, pretty good team. Any thoughts on that one, Michael, before we move on?
No, I think just quickly, I agree with you there, Matt. I think that's a good shout out for the starting 11 there. But I think generally that's a very good NPL 2 starting 11, Chris. So you've done well there. There's plenty of quality all across the park as we saw in NPL 2 when we got the chance this season. So big ups to those players, and hopefully NPL 2 can still produce those same quality of players, even though we're losing. Obviously, O'Connor Knights being promoted to NPL 1. I still think that there's a mass amount of talent, especially when you've got the likes of ANU that are going to be eager and ready to go to claim promotion next season. You got White Eagles in Queanbeyan, etc. So it's going to be a fantastic season next year, and plenty of these players will still be in and around, bar the O'Connor Knights players.
Yeah, no, 100% there. Let's, before we get into the NPL 2 teams in more depth, let's quickly go over the teams that Russ announced as the team of the seasons. He stressed that this isn't a Capital Football official team. This is a team voted on by the NPL 1 coaches, and the coaches were not allowed to choose their own players. And same for the NPLW team. They weren't allowed to choose their own players. Let's start with the NPL 1. In goalkeeper, we had Sam Brown from Canberra, Croatia, and the substitute goalkeeper was Jacob Cole from Tigers. Defenders, we had Nick Forst from Olympic, Lockie Griffiths from Tigers, Matt Gerbisher from Canberra, Croatia, and Josh Calabria from Monaro. The substitute was Buddy Abbas. Midfielders, we had Sam Rossbarken from Monaro, Gabriel Cole from West Canberra, Rocco Stricker from Tigers, and the substitute was Nick Rathjen. Forwards, we had Isosari Hegi from Olympic, Nick Popovich we had from Tigers, and Bernabeu Madrid from Gungahlin. The substitute was Nikola Taneski. Any quick thoughts on that? I mean, that's a pretty strong team, but I guess it was that competitive this year. Of course, I didn't see The likes of Gillespie, who easily could have made it, wasn't on there from first glance. And naturally, I know he was injured, but naturally, it's weird to see a team of the season without Jack Green in there as well. But obviously, he was injured the majority of the season. Most of these players are pretty spot on the money, and there's still more players you could have added in there. That's how competitive it was this season. Any thoughts on that one, Chris, before we move on?
Oh, look, it's a fantastic team. The one thing that I was probably most surprised about, is probably going to come for shock to you, is Matt Gerbischer. To me, undoubtedly, and I use that term quite literally, undoubtedly one of the top two centre-backs this city has had for the last 10 years. I'd chuck Jack Green in there with him. But I don't actually think this was his best year. Again, I probably didn't see enough of Canberra Croatia's games, but that's probably the high standards that I hold Matt to, because I think he's just such a fantastic player. So again, surprised, but whether they're, especially with Jack also out, whether there's another centre back that really stood up that deserved that spot. So again, I'm not so sure. And I'm very happy that young Gabriel Cole got a spot in the midfield. He's a fantastic young player. Very, very good. And look, Gillespie, I think most people think he's one of the standout players in the competition, but that front three was probably inevitable, just by the goals that they scored. Sosa in a team that was expected to struggle from the start, and he had a fantastic year. Obviously, they didn't struggle, and he was probably a big part of that. And yeah, the other two, it's probably a surprise that some of that Deacon front line, that Tedeschi was kind of the only one in there, especially when he was a late starter. He kind of moved mid-season into the team, which is probably the only surprise. I think Nick Kalfas actually ended up missing a fair bit of the season through injury, but Barrich and Greenwich were always quality, but a good team. There's no doubt about it.
Indeed. And next up, we have the NPLW Team of the Year, of course, voted by the NPLW coaches. They weren't allowed to vote for their own players. In goalkeeper, we have Chloe Lincoln from the CUA. Substitute was Sammy Ems. Defenders, we had Tiana Jaber, Renee Juna, Alice Churchill, Rhiannon Fensom, and Maddie Percival was the substitute. That was Maddie Percival from Gungahlin. Juna, Churchill, Fensom, all from Canberra, Croatia, and Tiana was West Canberra, but then played for Belconnen as well. She still made the amount of games required. In midfield, who else other than Michaela Thornton, the stalwart for Belconnen United? Jenny Bissett as well had a terrific season. Sasha Grove for the CUA, and the substitute was Erica Pennyfield from Gungahlin. Up front, I'm pretty sure you two can guess who the three up front were. We had Ashley Sykes, Grace Gill, and Brittany Palombi. And as a substitute, we had Talia Backhouse, who scored quite a lot of goals as well. So she was unlucky not to make that team. Any thoughts on that one, Michael, before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that the majority of the team is made up from Belconnen, Canberra, Croatia, and you've also got, Olympic and CUA. But obviously, given how strong Belconnen and Canberra, Croatia are in the NPLW, I mean, there's no surprises that a lot of their players get the shout out there. But I mean, they're all fantastic players. So I think those selections are definitely warranted. I think we didn't get the full experience of Michelle Heyman at Gungahlin United. Obviously,
she didn't play 9 games. No.
Yeah. So if she had played the 9 games, then obviously, she would have had obviously a fantastic shout as well, given her quality up front. So I think given the criteria that you mentioned, where you had to play over 9 games, and the list of players that you've just named off there, I think that is pretty much spot on.
Yeah, and for me, I guess the standout for me is the how well the young goalkeepers went there. Both Chloe Lincoln and Sammy Ems there. Sammy Ems got called up for Matilda's training camp, like we mentioned in previous shows, and Chloe Lincoln as well, the CUA keeper. They both got very bright futures, I think. I think some of the best games I've seen this season, some of the best saves and the best games I've seen this season has been from those two between the sticks. So it's going to be interesting to see how they progress in their season. They both got a lot of potential. All right, let's get straight into the NPL2 review, shall we? Let's start with first place O'Connor Knights. They were, of course, crowned league champions after finishing top of the table before lockdown happened. And then more importantly, when you finish top of the table now, you get that elusive promotion to NPL1, which a club like O'Connor has been fighting for a very long time. Overall, very, very good season, like you eloquently put it, Chris, in your sort of team of the season there. O'Connor Knights will, like I mentioned, would be stoked to be on top of the pile, of course, finishing 2 points above ANU. And like you mentioned, Chris, the important thing for them was that they beat ANU in the one game that they did play 1-0. But it would have been the one disappointment I have out of like the season finishing early. The biggest one for me is that we didn't see ANU and O'Connor play again. Because, like you mentioned, they had to play twice, and maybe it would have got to the point where they would have had to play each other back to back because they were the last game of the season. But it wasn't looking like they were finding any time to play each other. So it could have been a back to back just before finals, which would have been sort of like a 2-leg aggregate or something. I was really looking forward to those two games. So for me, that's the biggest bummer out of the lot. O'Connor Knights, what's impressive for me was their ability to play both sides of the ball. Against the teams that you would expect them to do well against. They went all out attack, improved their goal difference, but the teams that they were competing with for the top of the table, that's when they could show that they could play, they could defend well, they could keep it tight, break efficiently and well. You saw it, I think, in most of their games against the top of the table teams, how solid they were at the back. Their midfield three also is fantastic, especially in that ANU game. I thought they were and the Queanbeyan game at High Street that was filmed, especially those two games they were fantastic in. For me, their improvement in defense was probably their biggest standout for me compared to last season. But if you talk to anyone at O'Connor Knights, last season wasn't a real season from them, not from me. They were also able to persevere throughout injuries, like we mentioned quite a bit throughout the season. So it's always a positive that they had quite a lot of depth there. Chris, what did you make of O'Connor Knights this season?
Yeah, look, as I touched on before, they were a very, very strong team. Fantastic squad on paper. Fantastic coach in Miro. So expectations were always going to be high, but sometimes you don't meet them, and they really kind of put it together. Their consistency was good, and they ground out a lot of wins. Just got to look kind of at the table. They ended up top. Brindabella ended up bottom. They beat Brindabella twice by a single goal. So it's not like they were putting 6-7 past teams all the time, but they were just consistent at kind of getting those wins. One loss to a miraculous goal as well in added time. So and that was it. And then the only other points that they dropped was a draw on their second trip away to Griffith, which was only like the second or third last game, a 1-1 draw. And then surprisingly, a 1-1 draw with Weston earlier. It was probably about round 4 or 5. And look, to be honest, because I didn't get to see them too much, they weren't particularly good in that game. But they bounced back. Miro worked out what went wrong, and they kind of corrected it and steered themselves forward, because after that game, they only dropped 1 more point for the rest of the season, or 2 points. Look, quality team. They have I think we've talked about it before, again, how solid they are down the spine, with, Liam Walsh and Daniel Roberts, just extremely solid midfield pairing. Kynan Dodd and March and Sigmont, very solid in the middle. They lost probably their best central defender, Dylan DeMontis, in pre-season. So a massive hit for what would have been for most clubs. But in the end, they ended up still having the best defensive record. Out wide, Mitch Steenbergen, again, he's been around forever, but he actually had quite a good year at left back. Jack Rutherford's the reigning, essentially, player of the year for NPL2 from 2 years ago, because we didn't have one last year. Jack probably didn't have his best season, but again, it's kind of like my analogy with Matt Derbyshire. I hold Jack to an extremely high level, so he probably didn't get to that, but he still had a fantastic year. Very solid at right back. Again, attacking in the middle, I talked about Pat O'Rourke, but then it's kind of that pace that they have up front. Nico Kresic, Josip, he didn't play very much, but when they could get him on the field, again, he caused a lot of trouble. And Paki Manda, when he made that mid-season transfer, just again, another fantastic pace outlet. But probably a good shout out needs to go to Dave McCarron. He made the kind of move over from White Eagles to O'Connor. It's a massive move, crosstown rivals, but he was fantastic. Again, he's not a spring chicken, but his game's not really based on too much speed. He's just he's that fantastic kind of solid number 9, and he was fantastic for them again this year.
Big question before we move on to ANU. How do you think they'll do in NPL1? Of course, they've got a coach in Miro that understands of NPL1 very well, having a coach there. Decent amount of their players also played there, and even a lot of their younger players have played 23s at NPL1, for example. So
even guys like Jordan Glover, he played at Tuggeranong Premier League. There's a lot of first grade experience. What will be interesting is, I've talked to a lot of people about this in the last 2 weeks. There are a lot of NPL1 standard players playing in NPL2, and you always have to ask, why are they playing in NPL2 and not NPL1? And it's usually off-field reasons, their life reasons, why they're not playing in first grade. And I kind of probably have a spattering of those who probably fit that mark. Guys like Liam Walsh, who's been playing first grade at Gungahlin for the last 4 or 5 years. It will be interesting to know whether those guys will stay and play NPL1 next year, knowing that they kind of didn't play NPL1 this year for a particular reason. So it will be interesting. Who knows? Miro might just kind of have got them all together to go give us 1 year in first grade, and they're all ready to go up together. Again, I wouldn't be surprised, because Miro's that kind of galvanizing character. But that will be interesting to say who stays, who they even want to keep. I'm sure that they and who they can attract. So I'll be very interested if that team went up just as a complete package. I still think they would actually do quite all right. NPL1's kind of this year, I think it ended up what we all thought was going to be a clear top 4 and bottom 4. Took a long time to appear, but right at the end, I think that started to appear. And I think that O'Connor going up without any changes would actually be right in the mix in that kind of bottom 4 anyway. And if they pick up a few talented players, there's a good chance that they will shock a few teams. I've got a feeling, no one would say it publicly, but I think that a few NPL1 clubs are probably going to take them a bit lightly. Think that kind of welcome to the big boys, and I think O'Connor are probably going to revel on that and probably have a few surprises.
Yeah. Before we move on, I was about to say, you mentioned that there, and there's a decent amount of NPL1 clubs that I don't think will take them lightly. Monaro definitely will be one of them, considering they did play them in that FFA Cup match, and O'Connor led them for like the first half, I believe, or just before the first half. They understand their quality, and I think a lot of teams won't underestimate them, but I understand the general premise of where you're coming from. There are O'Connor Knights from outside the first grade as well. They're building their youth again. I saw on Facebook that they're bringing Tony Oliveira who's been around Canberra football for a long time to help Alex Teranich with the youth program there, and he'll be coaching 23s as well. So, they're a very ambitious club, O'Connor, and best of luck to them. I think they'll do well. And like you said, if they can pick up a few more players as well, I reckon if they can pick up a few more players and keep playing as well as they do, both sides of the ball, they might shock some teams, grab some points, and maybe even fight for that top 4 if all goes well. Let's move on to second place. Michael, who do we have in second place? Another very good team that did very well this season.
Yeah, you're right, Matt. Obviously, ANU finished second. They did possess the league top goal scorer in Sam Carters with 14 goals, as we touched on his quality a bit earlier. I think they proved to be a tough outfit to break down pretty much all season, and I do think that they have obviously one of the best squads in NPL2 at their disposal. And I think that's what saw them compete up alongside O'Connor for the majority of the season. It was just, and especially towards the end there, it really came down just to those two teams, and you just thought, was one going to overtake the other? And O'Connor managed just to hold on with that 2-point advantage. And obviously, given the circumstances with COVID, they were so close, but they just missed out on that promotion that they had seeked, because we know how much of a stonewall they've been in this sort of Capital League NPL2 competition over the last 5+ years. They've been one of the best teams in the competition every year. Obviously, apart from the 2020 campaign where they struggled a little bit, but aside from that, they've always been a constant feature in the finals picture, and I definitely expect them to come back a lot stronger next season, and maybe with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder as well. I think there's obviously many positives for Adam Condopedero to take out of that 2021 season. Obviously, it's disappointing that they weren't able to clinch promotion. But like I said, they had the top goal scorer in the league. They were right up there until the end of the season, and maybe a few tweaks and turns to take into next season could see them make that jump to be the side that's promoted in 2022. Chris, what did you make of their season? It was obviously very, very close, like I mentioned, between them and O'Connor to clinch that promotion spot. I can imagine it must be obviously a little bit frustrating for them to miss out in those circumstances, having been so close.
Yeah, look, I know that they are very frustrated, and because they wanted to see it played out on the field. And as we said, 2 more league games against O'Connor, very likely 2 finals games against O'Connor. And as Matt kind of said before, it was shaping up that they were going to play each other 3 times in a row. They catch up, then the final round, and then the first round of finals. Just would have been an absolute crazy thing to witness. But look, they had a fantastic year. They've always got high expectations, and last year was kind of pretty tough one for them. And so Adam kind of came in, and he really picked up the pieces extremely well and got them playing some fantastic football. He changed the formation around, they kind of moved to a 3-5-2, and their energy levels, the movement off the ball, it's just, they're a fantastic team. We've talked about some of the players, guys like Sam Carter's. Some players didn't have fantastic seasons. Another guy I think we've talked about before, who's definitely been one of the best players in this competition the last 4 or 5 years, is Max Model, and he missed a lot of the season through injury, so he never really got to full flight. And he was kind of just coming back into full fitness form at that tail end. So again, he's just a kind of that added weapon that would have really helped them in those kind of crucial games at the end. But alas, we don't get to see it. They had some really, their under 23s team is fantastic, as I had to witness firsthand. And some of the young players kind of stepped up during the season. There were Gus Coleman was really good when he was called, but this Leo Hadley was a fantastic young player, and I think he'll be one who will be straight into their first grade squad next year if he's still there. Again, look, we talked about the kind of Hopi and Monty at the back, and one player that I think that they missed was that the young Liam Neeson, who they had up front and was just scoring goals for fun to start the year, but he essentially had a season-ending injury. So it'll be interesting to see if how bad that was and whether he'll be back next year, because that'll be a really big pickup for them. I guess an interesting thing will be to see whether Jan and Chase, who are essentially the two elder statesmen, hang around next year. Look, I think that they'll definitely be involved in the club, but whether they go around one more time at this level, I suspect they both will, especially the way that the season ended. It's a funny thing sometimes. I think if they had actually won and got promoted, those two probably would have hung up their boots. It's just a feeling that I would have had. But now I think that they've got some unfinished business. So I suspect that they'll both probably go around again next year.
Matt, do you have any thoughts to add on before we move on at all in terms of how ANU played this season, and obviously we've touched on just how close they were, but I mean they'll use plenty of incentive to come back next season
100%
to gain promotion.
Like Chris said, I think there'll be a fire in their belly even greater than it would have been even if they just missed out on the field per se, because like every time I saw them play, they were always one of the best sides on the field, or 9 times out of 10 I saw them play. Anyway, I guess one of the only teams they sort of stumped sort of more than once by were White Eagles, where they drew twice in the three matches they played them. They did win the other one though. But the majority of them, they mostly, they dominated a lot of possession, created a lot of chances. They were always great to watch play. If you want to go watch a game, definitely ANU is one of your shots in NPL2 in that regard. And I think the big thing for them moving into next year is the how settled that group is. Chris, Chris has been around for a while. He'll tell you how important it is to have a settled group, especially in Canberra football. And I think that will play into their hands heading into the promotion race next year. I think that's going to be crucial for them, because a lot of the other teams might not have that sort of stability that they do. All right, let's move on to White Eagles. White Eagles this year, 3rd place. Up and down season. I guess before you forget, they were in 4th place, ended up in 3rd place because of the 24-point deduction for Queanbeyan, which Michael will mention later when he covers Queanbeyan. But up and down season for Eagles, like I mentioned before. Began the season very well. O'Connor, they had a win against O'Connor. They had a draw against ANU, a big win against Brindabella. They started the season very well, but I guess it all came crumbling down with that 7-0 thrashing against Queanbeyan City at High Street. I was there. I saw the second half of that one. That's when it was like 5-0 in the second half, and it was just you could just tell it just wasn't good. Besides the fact that they let in those goals, just the morale did not seem there after that match, which was surprising considering how well they did going into it. And I think the big thing for Eagles is they didn't have the stability with the coach. They started the season with Steve Forshaw, and then Eric Benet took over until they found another coach. Brought back Graham Plath. Plathy was only there for a little bit. Then they had Eric again to finish the season. Oh, that didn't. I don't think they helped the White Eagles throughout the season. So for me, if they want to push, we all know they have the quality to push for the top 4. But if they can sort out the coaching situation next season, keep that secure, then I think they have a good shot of making it. If they don't have it, it's going to be a little difficult, and they'll probably have an inconsistent season. But they'll have great performances. They could easily still make the top 4, and they'll have great performances like they did this season as well. of course, with the win against O'Connor and the Brindies to be specific as their biggest wins. Brindies in terms of the goal, how many goals they scored, and O'Connor in terms of the importance of the victory. So what did you think of the White Eagles season, Chris? A little up and down.
Exactly that. Up and down. That's, I think, the only way you can describe it. They lacked consistency. You think about it, the only team to beat O'Connor, 2 draws off ANU, so they took the most points off ANU. They only team to beat O'Connor. Then they lose 7-0 to Queanbeyan. They lost, I think, to Wagga.
I remember there was a red card in that one, but you have to, in terms of Wagga, you have to be what's in front of you, and they took it down.
So, they just couldn't get that consistency on there, and off the field it showed. 4 different coaches in a season. So it's not the look, we talk about it. White Eagles are the standard bearers for this competition, as Michael would know. From being involved in the club going back 10 years ago, it was almost guaranteed White Eagles would be in a grand final. And anything less was a failure for them. So to kind of have this season, it's probably a little bit off what they're used to. But in the end, kind of from where they were looking mid-season, they kind of pulled it all together, and it was ended up kind of saving a lot of face, because it could have gone a lot worse than it did. And in the end, they finished 3rd in a extremely strong competition. So actually, when you kind of boil it down, it wasn't too bad. They had a very, very strong team. Again, I would say it's not the best White Eagles team, but teams with Adam Rodgick, and they've had some absolutely fantastic quality players in here. But this team was actually quite good. Dayan, again, he's not in his prime, but he still had a fantastic year. We talked about Caleb from that left back position. Ed McCarthy up top scored some fantastic goals. I was really impressed by young Gabriel Ayul, a young player who kind of came over. I think he'd played a bit of first grade at Gungahlin a few years ago. Fantastic striker, strong, fast, great technique. And another one who really impressed me is the young Rowan Maxwell, centre midfielder, fantastic player. A lot of raps from White Eagles over the last 2 years, and it was probably the first time I really ever paid a lot of attention to watch him play, and extremely impressed. He's a very, very good player. So again, a player I think White Eagles would be kind of looking to build their team around going in the future.
Michael, who do we have next up?
Yeah, next up we've got Yoogali, who finished 4th in this season. They were obviously semi-finalists of the FFA Cup qualifying comp, so they did really well to reach that stage of the competition. And obviously last season they were the grand final runners-up, and they just didn't manage to obviously emulate the successes of 2020 into 2021, but I think they did fantastically well to come back throughout the season after enduring a pretty rough start to 2021. We thought, where were they going to end up? Where were they sort of going? We didn't really know what direction they were heading in, to say the least, because of the results that they were getting at the start of the season. And we were obviously casting our minds back to how well they had done the previous season. And we're just sitting there thinking, well, what's going wrong? And I know that there wasn't obviously a large sample size to take out of last season, because there was only so little games that were played, even with the final series. But I think they showed fantastic resilience to put behind the form that they went under to start the season, and they managed to claw their way back. And I think they did well to clinch a spot inside the top for all things considered. So, Chris, do you sort of just resonate those sort of feelings at all, or is there anything else that stood out in your mind when you take a look at Yoogali and where they finished up in fourth position?
Yeah, look, I think it was probably the travel that really got them. They didn't have that much travel last year in that shortened season. You could see by mid-season, they were sometimes traveling with 19, 20 players for 2 games, and just doing a whole lot of kind of self-preservation in the 23s to just get themselves through and ready to play the next game in first grade. And they were still getting results. And I think that you got to say hats off to them for doing that, because without that, if guys were playing, if they were having 14 fresh players in first grade, I think it would have been a very different story. And I guess you kind of look to their FA Cup run, and that shows when they had fresh team what they could actually do. And going all the way to that semi-final, drawing with the NPL1 champions in Tigers, they took them to extra time. That was fantastic. Probably watching that game was almost the best performance by an NPL2 team in any game that I saw this season, their game against Tigers. Last year, they had this amazing tag team up front with Danny Roach and Mitch Badgianti, and they ended up being the top 2 goal scorers in the league last year from one team. That's just crazy in itself. But Mitch didn't end up playing many games. I think he played 3 or 4 games in the end this season, and I think that probably affected Danny Roach in the end. They had a really good understanding, those two. So it's one player. You see it. Liverpool, you can see what taking one player out of a team can do. The whole chemistry can fall down sometimes. I think a really good shout out has to go to Mason Donadell. He I think probably ended up their second top goal scorer. He was playing a good 60, 70 minutes in 23s every week, and then starting for first grade, and then would go on and score 2 goals in a game in first grade. And I imagine he's probably only 17, 18, 19, somewhere around there. So a fantastic player. And again, if Yoogali stay around, and he definitely is one that they're 100% going to make sure that they try and keep hold of.
Yeah, and I just wanted to sort of echo the thoughts you guys are saying about Yoogali. Props to them at Wagga for, making those trips is always difficult, especially when you get players, sort of unable to make the trip due to, and COVID ended up hampering these sort of fixtures anyway from both sides. But to do that, every second week, and I know at one point with some injuries, I had a very thin squad, and I think he said in the interview that we had on Facebook here, Luke Santolin said, look, at the start, it was hard to deal with because we didn't have to travel too much last year, but he felt they were coming into their own, and everyone sort of figured out the way how to handle, these sort of moments. And I think we're going to see, if they can keep the core group of their players together, I think we're going to see an even improved season from Yoogali next season. Next up, we have 5th place. We have their Riverina counterparts in Wagga City Wanderers. Of course, they were the reigning. Before this season, they were the reigning NPL2 grand final winners. They also had a good run in the FFA Cup, knocking out Brindabella on their way to Monaro. At the end of the day, though, they were also Charity Shield runners-up also. Look, it was a tough season for Wagga. We've mentioned many times on the show, it was a big transition year. It's very hard for any team to lose as many starters as they did, considering how good they were last season, and to expect them to finish in the top 4 as well. It was always going to be a tough ask. David Leonard was pretty realistic of the situation. He said, for us, look, we're just going to improve all the young players that they have. The young players won 23s as well, but as you would know, Chris, to bring up that many 23s players and expecting them to convert their form from 23s to first grade, it's easier when it's a couple of players, but as many as they had to. it's always going to be difficult. In saying that, though, they've got some big wins throughout the season. Wagga City Wanderers, like they win against White Eagles. They win against so it's they win against Brindabella, I think, as well. They got a good win against them also. So it's a team that I think there's a lot of young players, and if they can keep the core of the young players, the only problem is, of course, they're going to be losing Luke Stevens, who I thought was an absolute standout this season. Some of those goals he scored was absolutely terrific. And like I said, I agree. Hopefully we see him in NPL, give NPL 1 a crack as well. I think he'll do well with certain sides there. In saying that, though, Wagga, it's the issue with them that most of their younger players move on to uni, don't they, and move on for jobs. So it's going to be difficult for them. But I hope they've got a good core there, got a good culture there. Hopefully they can bounce back next season. In saying that, though, they did get some good wins throughout the season. What do you think about Wagga, Chris?
Yeah, look, as we all predicted, it was going to be a tough season for Wagga. They lost pretty much 90% of that championship winning team. And bringing in so many young players was always going to be hard coming into a league that's this strong. And again, just like Yoogali, they have that extra factor of travel, and they do have probably another added issue. And this is probably an issue going forward, is not only do they have that kind of uni issue where guys get to uni age and they leave, but they have a reasonably strong local league, and that's a blessing and a curse in a way. While Yoogali's domestic competition has kind of fallen by the wayside a little. Harnwood, their big arch rivals, now play in the Wagga competition. Players actually have a choice to either play for Wagga City Wanderers and travel to Canberra every second week, or just play in their local competition. So they do have a tough battle trying to convince the best players in Wagga to play with them rather than play in a competition. And you can see that from over the last 3 years, the kind of guys who come in, then go out, back to the league and back in. So it's tough. And when you're not winning, that makes it even harder. So, they're going to have a tough year. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how their recruiting goes this year, when they're going to try and convince a whole bunch of guys who played in the local Wagga comp to come, when they would just see, well, you didn't win many games, so why would we want to travel all the way to Canberra to not be winning too many games when we can just play in what is a quite a decent competition in Wagga. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do there, because obviously they can only fish in the pond that they've got. So it's really going to be a battle about convincing the best players. Because look, if the best players in Wagga all played in that team, it would be a very, very competitive team. It's just getting all those guys to be part of it.
Yeah, so up next we've got Queanbeyan City in 6th position. They obviously had Mark Shields, who we touched on earlier, finish up as a runner-up in the goal scoring charts in NPL2 this season. He had a great year after what Chris mentioned earlier about experiencing a bit of a slow start, which can happen to strikers, especially playing in a new team. But once he, scored his first couple of goals, it just kept coming from that moment onwards. And I think that's what it takes for strikers. It's easy to go through a bit of a dry spell when the ball's not going in, but once you get one of those to fall into the back of the net, that's the sort of kickstart that you just need. So I think that's what happened to Mark during the season this year. They were obviously well inside the top 4 all season behind O'Connor and ANU, and obviously the big talking point and the massive highlight when you associate their 2021 campaign and why they finished in 6th position was the massive point deduction that they endured of 24 points, which put them right down the table and obviously kissed goodbye any hopes of gaining promotion or even getting a top 4 spot. And then most recently, this past Sunday night, Coach Gabby Wilk announced on his Facebook that he's no longer the coach of Queanbeyan City after just one season in charge. So I think we can expect a lot of change to come in this Queanbeyan City team next season, because I know that obviously the pedigree that Gabby Wilk has in Canberra football over the last 15 or so years, especially at Cooma, and the players that he was able to convince to come and play in Queanbeyan, that is no longer there. So it's now a matter of how many of those players are actually going to stay around for next season. So they could look a whole lot different than they did this season. So there's a lot of questions being posed in and around their squad for next season. But this season, they were in the top four. They got some very big results, as you mentioned, with the 7-0 win that they got over White Eagles. They had that in their repertoire. I think in my opinion, they were probably the most dangerous side going forward with the players that they had. They probably had the best attacking talent, and in terms of just having players that can put the ball in the back of the net. But it was just inconsistency around other areas around the field. And obviously the point deduction didn't help with their cause either. So I think there were obviously a few positives in and out throughout the season, but obviously that was overshadowed by what was to occur later on in the season with the point deduction. So what did you make of Queanbeyan City's season, Chris?
Look, I echo everything that you just said. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens now that Gabby's gone. He pretty much single-handedly brought in 90% of that team. So to see whether they stay or there's just a mass exodus, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with that club. I think I said this before on a previous pod. Look, on paper, that's the best, strongest squad on paper in this season. And look, I'd liken it to the Galacticos in the early thousands, where when that team was on, they could win games 6-0, 7-0, but they didn't win the La Liga that year, well, the second year that they were in there, because they were inconsistent, and this team was inconsistent. And it's funny because their inconsistency was only against the other top two. They didn't drop a point against anyone below them. Mm-hmm. ANU and O'Connor did, but they lost every single game except for a draw. That last game, a draw with ANU. They lost both games to O'Connor. They lost 2 to ANU. So they, you kind of, that flat track bully tag, they were good. They think they put 6 against Wagga twice. They put 5 against Brindy, 5 against Weston, 7 against White Eagles. But when they came to playing those 2 teams ahead of them, they just couldn't put it together. And look, some fantastic quality players in that team. A lot of guys who have won first grade at Tigers with Gabby. So then you had a lot of trust in those guys. But I think they had a lot of high expectations. I think the club financially put a lot of backing behind them, again, with a lot of expectations. So it's going to be interesting whether they're willing to invest as heavily as they did this year, again, noting essentially what happened. In terms of the points deduction, look, whether it was right or wrong, you could get into that debate for a long time. But I actually feel sorry for them in a way that I think Queanbeyan ended up taking the brunt of what a lot of indiscretions that happened in NPL1. There were some fights in car parks and on the field, and spectators getting punched, and things that we all saw on Bar TV, referees getting abused, and not enough action was taken. And there was a lot of pressure put on Capital Football for more action to be taken than just fines, but points. And then when it happened to Queanbeyan, think they then copped the brunt of all the pressure that had been put on Capital Football from indiscretions from other clubs. So in that way, I kind of feel a little bit bad for them. I think that they kind of copped a lot of what other people had built up, but whether it was right or wrong, yeah, again, I'm not sure. But look, I think that the solace that they can find is it absolutely had zero bearing on the season for them. COVID meant that they weren't going to win the league anyway because they were 7 points, behind ANU, I think. So, it's just a little bit of pride saying that you finished sixth instead of third. So I think they really kind of probably dodged a bullet in some ways, but I think it's going to be the effects of whether that had any thing to do with Gabby leaving, and then what are the knock-on effects from Gabby leaving. I think that's really going to be the main story here.
Absolutely. Matt, do you have any thoughts and feelings on Queanbeyan's 2021 campaign before we move on?
No, you guys mostly mentioned it there. I guess it was a good point to mention that they weren't able to get any wins bar that draw against White Eagles. Sorry, not White Eagles. Against ANU early on, because that was the big thing that cost them in the end. Those must-win games they weren't able to, and they weren't able to be in that top, race at the end. In saying that though, geez, like Michael mentioned, going forward, just the few games I was there, especially their one match against Weston, it could have been 15. It was just they were that deadly on the counter. They were that deadly on the run. It was frightening at times. And of course, the most impressive one was, of course, at victory against White Eagles. It was just I don't think I've ever seen such a one-sided game in Canberra. That was just with two quality opposition as well, like two rivals. I haven't seen such a one-sided game. That was insane. So yeah, look, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next year with Gabby moving on. But they are, they're still a very ambitious club. I know that a lot of the people there, similar to O'Connor and some of the other clubs, they really want to make NPL 1. They want to push to be back in that top division again. And even though that Gabby's not there, best of luck to Gabby as well, might I add. Yeah. It's going to be, they're still going to push for it regardless. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see either some of those players staying or they bring in some other players that might do the job for them. Like I said, though, it's going to be difficult against but once again, we're talking about a team which might have a lot of change while ANU won't have any change. But that's something that we'll mention next year in our preview. Next up, we have 7th place, Weston Molonglo. Tough season for the Western side. Once again, hampered by injuries. We mentioned this throughout the season, but they had a lot of injuries. In saying that, though, they were able to get some good results, like that draw against O'Connor and that big win against Wagga City Wanderers. There were still moments of very good stuff there from Weston. Some very good goals as well from Weston, like you mentioned, with records, goals. What'd you make of Weston's season? A lot of injuries.
Yeah, look, again, it was probably similar to White Eagles, that very up and down, inconsistent season. It was a tough season again, yep, with those injuries. So the kind of starting 11 chopped and changed every single week. But look, they were up against quality opposition. So I don't think that the final position on the table is that unfair. They had some really good wins, and there were some really good standout performances. As we said, Angus' record was fantastic in the middle. Abby Delahi up front. He started off with me in the 23s and moved to first grade to fill a hole. And he was fantastic. I think he scored 8 in 10 or something like that. Like, he was nearly a goal a game. So he was really good. Rory Evans, one of their centre backs, had a fantastic year. And new to Canberra, and he was quite a good quality player. And some of the 23s who kind of had to come up and fill some of those holes. Mitch Webb at right back was absolutely fantastic. Did not look out of place playing against pretty much anybody that he kind of came up against. Probably one of the fastest guys in the competition. And young Charlie Graham, who came on into the midfield. I think he was probably the man of the match in most of the games that he actually played when he came on. So, look, it was a tough season. Some of the guys kind of probably weren't in their best form. Sam McLaughlin, who's just a fantastic player. Again, he was in the NPLW Team of the Year from 2 years ago. He didn't play last year. He had some injuries. So it took him a long time to get anywhere near the kind of level that we know he can play at. And he was really just starting to hit his strides kind of, again, it's a common story when COVID hit. But look, again, we kind of talk about with White Eagles, they could have capitulated a few times, I feel, with so many things going against them, but they actually rallied quite well, and they had a fantastic win in that last game against Brindabella. So a pretty good way to finish the season for them, I think. And look, Ned Jeans, he did a really good job. When you have so many of these things go wrong off the field, it's hard to kind of keep that energy level up. But no, he just kept driving forward and kept the guys going.
Yep. Well, I echo those sentiments. Indeed, well done to Ned Jeans and the job he's done at Weston, considering all that was put in front of them. Michael, who do we have up in 8th place?
Yeah, so 8th and last was Brindabella Blues. Brindy's announced actually over the weekend that coach Zoran Glavnic has stepped down, and they've replaced him with Ray Juna as head coach. So most recently, Juna, he coached the CUA Youth League sides, the Central Coast Mariners Academy teams, and Brindabella under 18s as most recent as last season. So he'll take the reins for the 2022 campaign. And in my opinion, I think that's a great move for this Brindies outfit that obviously struggled a lot last season with sort of player departures, performances on the field. They just weren't able to really keep any structures. As hard as Zoran tried, and I mean, he's a great coach within himself. And I think his sort of resume speaks to that. It just didn't work out last season, and I think it's a new sort of era under Ray Juna. So we'll see how they go next season. But in terms of this past season, like I said, they struggled all season long to get results, and I think they only managed 2 victories all season in just 17 games. So I think that really speaks to the difficulties that they endured throughout the season. And I think that was highlighted when they lost Schaefer to Belconnen United during the season. That was what looked like their only goal threat for Brindies. And I suppose when you take a personality like that out of the team that is providing you your goals, you start to look around the pitch and wonder to yourself, well, where are they going to come from now? And I think that narrative was on showcase from when Schaefer left, and they just weren't able to recover, unfortunately. And wins were just really hard for them to get on the board. What did you think of how of the Brindies season, Chris? I think there was obviously a lot of negatives to focus on. Obviously, I think it's easy to get caught up in the negatives when you're sort of discussing and breaking down a team that has just finished last in the most recent season. But they obviously had a lot to deal with. They lost one of their best and key players, and they just weren't able to recover from that weren't they?
Yeah, look, I think we touched on it before. 2 games against O'Connor and the top of the table champions who got promoted, and they lost by a single goal. It's not like that they were getting completely whitewashed by teams. You lose your top goal scorer, who was, I think, top of the league goal scorer mid-season. And also Misic, who also left to O'Connor. It's very hard to just take those 2 guys out mid-season and then kind of keep going when you're already battling to get where you were mid-season, and then to lose those 2 players. I actually think Zoran was fantastic. He's a really good coach, and he gets these guys playing really good football. The game that I saw them at Woden Park, I was very, very impressed. Really, really, they're very, very strong down the spine. Like I said, Ollie at centre back, and then Dave Gurney and Nico Blaskovic in the middle were very, very solid. Probably one of the most solid centre midfield pairings in there. And then with Zach Lawrence and Curtis Schaefer up front, it was a really, really good spine. Probably they didn't have the quality of the supporting players. They're all good, but they probably just weren't at those guys' level to push for top 4. But they still played very good football collectively. And I think that really comes down to Zoran's influence. So, look, Ray's one of the top 2-3 coaches in Canberra. He's been involved in the women's national team setup. He's Canberra United W League coach for a little bit. Just because you put one of the top coaches in there, I'm not sure if that immediately is going to fix all the problems. But he, like I said, Zoran was a quality coach as well. So he's going to face those similar issues, I think, that Zoran had to face. So if they can hold on to those guys, I think that they had some quite good guys coming through their 18s. They actually had some very good players in their under 23s side as well that they could kind of bring up. But look, it's always going to be interesting for those teams. It's always interesting for a team that comes last to see what they can do to strengthen for next year.
Absolutely, Matt. Do you have any thoughts? Obviously, I think that. So just before you get into it, I think one of the biggest things to take away from this is that they're going from having one great coach in Zoran Glavnic to another great coach in Ray Juna. So, I mean, from their standpoint, that's 2 great coaches to have back to back, and now they enter this era with Ray Juna. Just how important is that move going to prove to be heading into next season? And I guess even though they weren't great this season, there'll still be plenty. There'll still be some positives for Ray and the club to take from this season going into next season, won't there, Matt?
Yeah, and I'm sure Ray would have seen a good amount of the games when he could, and he would have seen them playing some great football, like you guys have mentioned. I think a lot of the times I saw Brindabella play, I was very impressed with them. I thought they were, in some of the games, I thought they were unlucky. Granted, you can't call unlucky in every, in every game you lose. I guess this is sort of, I guess maybe Tuggeranong can make some of these calls as well. But the problem is, even if you're unlucky a lot, you can't call it all the time. But some of the games I saw them play, they were playing some great football. I rate Zoran as a coach, like you guys have said. I think he's a really good coach, and like you said, his resume speaks for itself. He won't have any issues finding another good coaching gig, whether it's an NPL 1 or 2. I think he'll definitely find one soon. And I think the important thing for Brindis is the preseason. They've announced it at a good time. He has a long time to work with the squad. I'm not sure when the Brindis preseason starts, but if it starts late this year, if they can do it like most clubs will try to do, that'll be important for them. It'll be interesting to see if he can attract a few players as well, because he's had a lot to do with youth teams in the past, and I've been intrigued to see if he can bring some players that he's coached formerly that are in NPL1. I'd be really intrigued to see if he can do that. But he's got a good solid core there that can play good football. I guess for them, it's about adding to what they've got and trying not to lose it throughout the season because, like you mentioned, they lost some key players throughout the season. All right, that's us done for the majority of the league. Before we sign off, I haven't got your thoughts yet, Chris, on Tuggeranong United. They're going to be coming down. That sets up, some possibilities, some southern derbies there with Brindies, that Tuggeranong derby, and then, of course, against Weston, Russ mentioned as well. Them against Queanbeyan is always a good game as well. So we're going to see some interesting stuff from them. What do you expect from Tuggeranong? I know it's, too early to tell, but what do you think about Tuggeranong being in NPL2 next year?
When I played first grade, Weston Tuggeranong was my favourite fixture of the season. I love that derby, and so it's good that, well, not good for Tuggeranong that they're down there, but it's good for the rest of the league because look, I've got a very strong suspicion that Mitch is going to stay with the team, and I think if Mitch stays with the team, then I think a lot of the players will stay with the team. We kind of talked. You kind of mentioned it then in terms of being unlucky. But it is a very good squad. It's pretty much the squad that was minutes away from making the top 4 last season.
Yeah.
They and again, I like to talk. Goal difference is probably the biggest indicator of the strength of a team. Leagues should be decided on points, but if you want to really look at whether a team is strong or not, goal difference. They were a team who didn't win a game, yet their goal difference was not negative 10, 12. It shows that they were only losing every single game by a single goal. They whether it was Kuma, Deacon, it doesn't matter. And if you're only 1 goal behind those teams, it means you've got a very, very strong team. A lot of players who I think a lot of first grade teams will be after. But if Mitch can hold on to them, they are going to be a very, very good team in this competition. But in saying that, they will have, they're not going to just bounce back immediately. It could happen, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. ANU are a very, very strong team. If White Eagles can pick up just a few more players, if Yoogali can pick up a few more players, really just to strengthen their squad so that they have enough. And if Queanbeyan, who knows what Queanbeyan are going to do, that I think that Tuggeranong are going to have a very, very strong competition on their hands. But they will I think that they're going to have a quality team. There's some really, really good young players in that Tuggeranong team. I know Mitch really likes working with those younger players. That Harry Truman and Harrison Bunell, Harrison Bunell has a lot of fans around, so he's going to be a hard one to hold on to. But I think that if Mitch can hold on to him, then he's going to be a fantastic player in this competition. So it'll be great to see how they go. It just really adds a lot of interest. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I agree. I think if Mitch stays, they have a good shot of getting back up. And if Mitch stays, like you mentioned, I think there's a good chance he can keep a good core of that group. Michael, any last thoughts before we sign off?
No, I guess just to quickly talk about Tuggeranong United being relegated to NPL2. I think a lot will depend on, like you guys have touched on, whether Mitch will stay on as the coach heading into next season. And like Chris said, I have a feeling that he's going to stay at the club as well. So I know that he's been obviously at Tuggeranong for a while, and he's built a really strong relationship with the club and some of the players in his team. And I know that those players love playing for him too. So I think if they're looking to keep those players, to regionally keep the same squad that we just saw in the NPL1 this season for next season, I think that'll depend on if Mitch stays at the club. And I have a strong feeling with him myself as well, Chris, that he'll stay. that he'll stay on next season as Tuggeranong look to go straight back up, and we know how difficult that can be because the club is obviously in a state where they've just been relegated and players' morale can be a bit low, and you have players that will want to seek other opportunities to play in NPL 1, but we'll just have to wait and see. But I'm going to be very intrigued to see how Tuggeranong United do.
I look forward to the Tuggeranong Brindabella derby too. That'll be a good.
So many derbies. Yeah.
There's a lot in NPL 2 at the moment. Now there's even more. It's great. So yeah, thanks for that. Any last words, Chris, before you head off? Thanks for joining us as well.
No, look, just thanks for having me. And look, I think Matty Moore said something similar the other day. But it's just fantastic what you guys are doing for football in Canberra, and hopefully you keep it up.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it indeed. And I'll see you back on for the preview, NPL 1 preview next year. NPL 2 preview next year.
Well, it's not NPL 2 anymore. It's Capital Premier League.
That's true. Have they announced it though? Yeah, I think they have.
Yeah, look, I think
everyone knows. Everyone knows, but I don't think they've officially announced it.
Yeah.
But yeah, regardless, we'll see you for that preview. So that's us for full Canberra Football Show podcast for the season. There'll be little tidbits here and there, of course. Before the end of the year, especially into the new year, we'll get those previews going up. But for full Canberra Football Shows, that's us for the season, episode 43. Thank you very much for all your support, and we appreciate it. And we look forward to another cracking season of football next year. Thank you.